there have been many papers. Definitely, the sort of mainstream media says all the time that women tend to take less risks, and they attribute it to they have a lower risk profile. Now,
What's the
some
difference?
yeah, that's the thing. So, and that's why what I'm coming to, given that
How do
now
you
that
know
you
they have a
teach
lower
personal
risk
finance.
profile? Because they take less risk.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the point. So, how do you measure risk profile? So, that again, back to the question that I asked you 20 years ago. Um, do you even believe there is such a thing as risk profile? The CFA literature divides risk profile into three subcomponents: the need to take risk, the ability to take risk, and then the risk perception. And then some papers that I found said that women basically have a lower risk perception. Once they perceive it the same way as men do, they take the same risk as men do. So I'm just connecting the two concepts of gender and risk profile. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that this reminds me of something that Danny Kahneman wrote in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which was about, he calls it sort of a substitution effect. It's where you have a hard problem and you don't have a solution. And so you solve a somewhat easier problem and ignore the substitution. so, so the hard problem is for the financial advisors to make recommendations for people, knowing that there are somewhat different attitudes towards risk. And the,
Well, okay, so just
the
briefing on that. I mean, attitude, is that a trait? I mean, are you, when you refer to attitudes to risk? Yeah.
that's what I'm going to next. And the underlying assumption there, the model that this goes back to, again, this post World War II model of human decision making, economic decision making. And in that model, you have a sort of a single parameter that gets to be different for each person, and that's called your risk tolerance. So the idea is everyone makes rational decisions, everyone has certain information and certain opportunities. But the one way that people differ is in their risk tolerance, which tends to be just like a static number. Although there are some models that say, well, maybe you have time varying risk tolerance. Um, I guess there's one other number that comes in, which is your discount factor, how much you care about the present versus the future. Um, and if you were to ask a psychologist whether each person has sort of the equivalent of this number, um, they'd probably laugh, because I think many psychologists realize that our attitudes towards risk are extremely context dependent. So they vary both with, are you having a good day, a bad day? Has something bad happened to you recently? All sorts of things like that. Um, they vary greatly with what the risk is, the type of risk. Some people might ride motorcycles and hold all their money in a bank account, like never invest in the market, but they're riding motorcycles. And as Kahneman and Tversky showed, attitudes towards risk vary with how you write the question. Now, if you read Thinking Fast and Slow, you know that one of the early studies Kahneman and Tversky did, They asked people hypothetical questions about what would you do? Suppose you're leading an army and you have to make a decision, and 200 soldiers will die for sure if you make one decision, and there's a chance that 600 will die, but everyone, it's like, which do you want to do? And then they changed the wording and described it all in terms of how many will survive rather than how many die. And about a third of people switched their answers. So simply saying to someone, do you want to buy a stock or a bond? If you buy a stock, you could make this much money. Versus, do you want to buy a stock or bond? If you buy stock, you could lose this much money. With the emphasis in different directions swings people around. My opinion is that people who have the same financial circumstances should be given very close to the same financial advice. And if you're going to vary it based on this sort of risk attitude parameter, you got to be very careful about not varying it a lot. So if you were to take two women who are high school teachers who are not going to inherit money and are not married and are the same age and have the same wealth, they should be having similar investments. And if they're getting advice to have very different investments, I'm like, why? Why would they be getting such different advice? And if someone says, well, one of them is risk tolerant and the other is not, you might think first, well, some of that advice should have been to push them away from the extremes in either direction. I do think where it might matter is you do sort of want to know if an investor might panic and sell all their risky positions in a scary time. And so if you could identify in advance people who are likely to panic, then it might make sense to put them into a portfolio that they won't panic from. So I think that a lot of this comes out of economics having said, oh, this risk tolerance parameter is really important for decision making. And so the CFA Institute and others have gone in search. It's like finding the Holy Grail. Where's it hidden? Where is this risk parameter hidden? Well, maybe it isn't. It's not. It doesn't exist.
Right. So take that panic example, and it's a valid one. You want people to stay invested for the long term. But I would have thought that if I knew nothing about finance and therefore how volatile markets can be, I'm more likely to panic. If I'm educated in financial education and I've done a finance degree now, I'm not likely to panic. What I'm saying is if my propensity to panic can be changed over time with more information, then it's not a trait. Whereas the literature and regulators and the industry all sort of measure this tolerance as if it's a trait. And there's psychometric tools. I'm sure you've seen Greg Davies and Phenometrica and all of those things. So the question that I have, again, 20 years later, I'm asking the same question. Why does it persist?
Yeah, well, it's because what I said before. They have a problem, don't know how to solve it, so they try to solve another problem. They'll say, can we come up with a test that gives us different answers about risk tolerance for different people? I mean, it is this idea, and it comes out of, again, the classic post-World War view of financial decision making, where everyone has this trait, as you say. I don't think that we do. I think we have something like that trait and it moves all over the place. It's very context dependent. I also agree with you that one of the things that moves it is how well do I understand the environment in which I'm making a decision, how much, if I know more, it's going to affect my decision one way or another. I've been asked a couple of times, companies who are developing these measures, I consulted with them, and I have to admit, I never liked anything. They'd give me these batteries of questions. I would take them. I'd say, why? Why should my answer on this determine whether I own more bonds or stocks? This makes no sense to me. So I think you and I agree that I'm not a big fan of these risk tolerant assessments. I think it's the companies do it largely probably for legal reasons. You're told you need to do it,